The conference room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional scratch of a pen against paper. My name wasn't mentioned once. I sat at the far end of the glass table, fingers locked tightly together beneath the polished surface, my nails digging into the skin of my palms as I tried to keep my face still. Across from me, my manager, Alex, smiled like a man who had conquered Everest, waving his hand over the projector screen as if every chart, every line of code, every breakthrough idea he was presenting was his and his alone. I had worked on that project for nearly 5 months. 5 months of late nights, skipped meals, and missed weekends. I had built the architecture, sourced the data, handled the clients, and even fought tooth and nail to fix a critical bug just hours before the final deployment. Yet here I was, not introduced, not thanked, not even acknowledged. Alex stood under the glowing blue light of the screen, clicking through the PowerPoint I had meticulously designed, even using the same phrasing I had practiced in front of the mirror the night before our mock presentation. He said "we" a few times, but never "her." When the VP asked who handled the security compliance protocols, Alex smiled and said, "Handled internally. I made sure our structure aligned with the latest standards." I had spent 3 weeks buried in documentation for that part alone. I could feel heat rising in my chest, a mix of humiliation and cold, sharp betrayal. When the meeting ended, the VP, Mr. Clarkson, shook Alex's hand firmly. "Impressive work," he said. "This could be a real game-changer for the Q4 roadmap." My heart twisted painfully. It was supposed to be my moment, the moment I would finally be seen. But Alex turned away, still talking, laughing even, as if he'd just spun gold from thin air. I returned to my desk like a ghost. The hum of fluorescent lights felt louder than before. My inbox had a few emails, one from a colleague who'd been in the room, asking if I'd be getting recognition. Another from HR reminding everyone about the upcoming holiday party. I stared blankly at the screen, barely registering any of it. I was numb, then bitter, then furious. Every time I blinked, I saw his smug face grinning at the VP like a cat, with a mouthful of feathers. For 2 days I stewed in silence, unsure what to do. If I complained to HR, it would look petty. After all, the presentation was team-based. If I confronted Alex, he'd just feign ignorance or claim he was protecting the team by streamlining the message. I knew how he worked. Always smooth, always friendly, always playing the political game just enough to keep his hands clean. But on the 3rd morning, as I stared at the polished surface of my desk, a decision formed in my mind like a steel blade. I opened the project folder, the real one. The one with timestamps, development notes, idea logs, initial drafts, rejected proposals, client emails, and final blueprints. My name was on every document. I didn't just contribute, I was the architect of it all. I made a single PDF, embedded with hyperlinks to backup files and dated commits from our codebase. Then I drafted an email to Mr. Clarkson. I didn't accuse Alex outright. I didn't cry foul. I wrote with precision, calm, and cold clarity. I said I wanted to ensure Mr. Clarkson had the full documentation on the project, for transparency and future development. I attached the PDF, included a short breakdown of the phases I led, and signed off with quiet professionalism. My hand hovered over the send button. For one long moment, I questioned if I was about to torch my entire career. Then I clicked. The moment the email left my outbox, a tidal wave of emotions crashed over me. Relief, fear, exhilaration, dread. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, my eyes locked on the screen as if the computer would spit out an immediate reaction. Nothing happened. No instant reply. No furious phone call. The office buzzed around me as usual, oblivious to the tiny rebellion that had just taken place from a corner desk by the window. By lunchtime, a knot had formed so tightly in my stomach that I couldn't even touch the sandwich I had packed. Every footstep in the hallway sounded like a summons. Every email notification made my heart leap into my throat. But still, there was nothing from Mr. Clarkson. I was beginning to convince myself that I had made a terrible mistake when, around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was his assistant. Her voice was crisp, polite, almost detached. "Mr. Clarkson would like to see you in his office at 4, she said. No explanation, no hint of tone that would give away what awaited me. I hung up and stared out the window, watching the gray clouds thicken over the city skyline like bruises. The minutes dragged until finally, at precisely 4, I gathered my laptop and notepad, wiped my sweaty palms on my skirt, and walked to the executive wing. Everything there was quieter, softer, the carpet plusher, the walls lined with expensive art instead of the cheap motivational posters that filled the rest of the building. I passed Alex on the way. He was coming out of the break room with a coffee in hand, grinning at someone on the phone. He didn't even see me. Mr. Clarkson's office door was open. He was standing by the window with a tablet in his hand, scrolling through something intently. When he saw me, he gestured toward a chair without speaking. My heart hammered against my ribs as I sat down, trying to keep my expression neutral. He turned, setting the tablet down on the glass-topped desk. For a moment, he simply looked at me, his sharp eyes appraising, weighing, measuring. Then he said, "Thank you for sending me the documentation." I nodded, unsure if I should speak. "I reviewed it," he continued, his voice even but not cold. "Very thorough, very detailed. Clearly, someone put a lot more work into this than was initially presented to me." A heavy silence filled the room. I could feel it pressing against my skin, thick and suffocating. I still didn't know if this was the part where he reprimanded me for going outside the chain of command or commended me for my initiative. "I appreciate initiative," he said finally, "especially when it comes with proof." My lungs unlocked, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. He wasn't angry. If anything, there was a flicker of something close to admiration in his eyes. "I want you to walk me through your process," he said. "From the beginning. Take your time." I opened my laptop with trembling fingers and began. I told him about the initial brainstorming sessions, the design drafts I had written on napkins and scratch paper after hours, the challenges I had faced and solved, the meetings I had led unofficially because no one else understood the depth of the technical requirements. I spoke about the night spent poring over client feedback, the whiteboard full of equations and diagrams I had built in the abandoned conference room on the 12th floor. Mr. Clarkson didn't interrupt. He took occasional notes but mostly listened, nodding thoughtfully now and then, his gaze sharp and unwavering. As I talked, the fear in my chest gradually melted into something stronger, pride. I had built something valuable. I had led something important. No matter what Alex tried to take from me, that truth was mine and could never be erased. When I finished, Mr. Clarkson leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in front of his mouth. "Impressive," he said simply. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "You should be the one presenting this at the quarterly review." The words hit me like a thunderclap. For a moment, I was sure I had misheard him. Me? I stammered. "You," he confirmed. "It's clear who the real architect of this project is. It's only fair." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. I rose on shaky legs, the blood roaring in my ears. As I walked toward the door, he called out, "And don't worry about Alex. I'll handle him." I didn't look back, but I smiled for the first time in days as I stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut softly behind me. The hallway seemed brighter as I walked back to my desk, although nothing had really changed. The same faded carpet, the same humming printers, the same clipped conversations floating through the air. But inside me, something had shifted. Something seismic. My heart thudded not with fear, but with a strange, soaring sense of validation. Mr. Clarkson believed me. More than that, he had seen me. I sat down and stared at my inbox, half expecting a fiery email from Alex or a curt message demanding an explanation. Instead, everything was quiet, almost eerily so. I refreshed my inbox again. Nothing. The weight that had been crushing my chest for days lifted slightly. I straightened my posture, squared my shoulders, and began reviewing my notes for the quarterly review. If Mr. Clarkson wanted me to present, I would be ready. Not just ready, I would be unforgettable. The next morning, the office buzzed differently. There was a tension, a current running under the usual banter and clattering keyboards. People whispered behind their hands, heads turned as I walked past. I tried to ignore it, though every step made my pulse quicken. When I reached my desk, I saw an email waiting for me from HR. Mandatory meeting at 11:30 a.m., conference room CI new. Somehow, I already knew. At 11:30 sharp, I walked into the room. Alex was already there, sitting stiffly at the long table. His usual easy grin was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. Across from him sat Marcy from HR, a small folder, open in front of her, her pen tapping lightly against the table. Mr. Clarkson stood near the window, arms crossed, face expressionless. I took the seat farthest from Alex, every movement deliberate, composed. Marcy cleared her throat. "We're here to discuss concerns about project ownership and recognition," she said carefully, her eyes flickering from me to Alex and back again. Alex tried to speak first. "There must be a misunderstanding," he began, his voice strained, trying to regain his usual confident tone. "The project was a team effort, and Enough," Mr. Clarkson said, his voice like a blade slicing through the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that left no room for argument. Alex fell silent instantly. Mr. Clarkson turned to Marcy. "The documentation submitted by Ms. Carter shows clear and consistent authorship over the project's major components. It's dated, detailed, and corroborated by the company's own activity logs. We are not here to debate that." Marcy nodded, her pen pausing. I sat still, my hands folded on the table, feeling both exposed and vindicated. I didn't look at Alex. I didn't need to. Mr. Clarkson continued. "Effective immediately, Ms. Carter will be credited as the project lead for all presentations, publications, and internal documentation. Alex, your role will be limited to operational support, under her direction, for the remainder of this project's life cycle." Alex's mouth opened slightly in shock. He looked at me then, as if seeing me for the first time, truly seeing me. His face turned red, then pale. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, trying and failing to spin this into a win. "And," Mr. Clarkson added, his voice dropping slightly in volume but increasing in weight, "your behavior is being reviewed for potential breach of professional ethics. Expect follow-up from HR." The room was utterly silent, save for the ticking of Marcy's pen against the folder. I kept my expression neutral, though inside me a chorus of fierce, jubilant voices were shouting and singing. Alex muttered something that sounded like an apology, but was too soft and garbled to truly mean anything. Marcy wrapped up the meeting. Quickly, formalities piling up like empty shells. As we were dismissed, Alex shot out of the room without a glance at anyone. I stayed behind for a second longer, gathering my things slowly. Mr. Clarkson waited until the door closed before he spoke again. "You're going to do very well here," he said quietly. "Just don't let them scare you into being small again." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to say something profound, something strong, but all I managed was a heartfelt, "Thank you." As I stepped into the hall, the whispers grew louder, more curious than cruel. Some people nodded at me with cautious admiration. Others turned quickly away. I didn't care. For the first time, I didn't care about their opinions, their alliances, their silent judgments. I walked back to my desk, taller, steadier. I opened my presentation draft and began to refine it, sharpening every point, strengthening every transition, polishing every slide until it gleamed like armor. My story would not be stolen again. Not by Alex, not by anyone. The day of the quarterly review arrived cloaked in storm clouds. Rain smeared the windows, painting the city in blurred streaks of gray and silver, as if the world outside was holding its breath along with me. I stood alone in the bathroom mirror. That morning, straightening the collar of my blouse, fixing my eyeliner with hands that trembled not from fear, but from a pressure I had never carried before. Being seen. The conference room was already half full when I entered. Executives, directors, and team leads murmured quietly as they took their seats, scrolling on phones or shuffling through printed agendas. At the front of the room, the projector screen stood ready, my first slide glowing faintly in its preview. For a moment I just stood there, laptop in hand, watching them. Alex was seated near the back, alone. His face was blank, but his eyes avoided mine. There was no smile, no greeting, not even the forced professionalism he had mastered so well. He looked smaller somehow, shrunken behind the collar of his too-starched shirt. Mr. Clarkson nodded as I passed him. "Whenever you're ready," he said, and those words grounded me. I plugged in my laptop, took a breath, and turned to face the room. Then I began. The first words out of my mouth were strong, steady. I walked them through the inception of the project, how it grew from a sliver of an idea into a framework that could reshape the way we handled our internal infrastructure. I explained the data models, the user interface redesign, the integration layers, and how they balanced performance with adaptability. I answered questions before they were asked. I anticipated their doubts and met each one with clean, clear evidence. And I never once apologized for knowing what I was talking about. For 45 minutes, I owned the room, not with arrogance, but with command. I watched the surprise melt into respect across their faces, especially those who had barely known my name before today. The director of product leaned forward. The CFO nodded. Mr. Clarkson, as always, said nothing, but I could feel the weight of his attention like a spotlight on my spine. When I clicked the final slide, the room was silent for a beat too long, and then came the applause. Not loud, not thunderous, but real, respectful, earned. Afterward, several people approached me directly, asking technical questions, offering praise, expressing genuine curiosity about next steps. I felt like I had stepped into a different version of myself, one I had always known was waiting behind the curtain of someone else's shadow. And now she had emerged fully formed, unflinching, undeniable. Alex left without speaking to me. I watched him go, a dark blur among suits and chatter, and felt nothing, not vengeance, not even pity. Just the quiet, unshakable truth that he had tried to steal something that never belonged to him, and now he was nothing more than a chapter I had already closed. Weeks passed. My name appeared on the internal bulletin, spotlighting innovative leadership in strategic systems. I was pulled into meetings I'd once only dreamed of attending. A new title followed, one that came with a corner office and a team of my own. I built that team slowly, carefully. I chose the ones who had been overlooked, the ones who stayed late not for glory, but because they cared. The ones with voices too quiet to echo down the glass corridors of power, until someone made space for them. Sometimes I still saw Alex in meetings, now part of a different project under someone else's management. We rarely spoke. He kept his head down. The gleam in his eye had dulled. He would survive, I was sure, but he wouldn't rise the same way again. Not now that people knew the story, because the truth had spread, not from gossip, but from the undeniable weight of facts. Not loud, but steady. Just like me. And in quiet moments when the office fell silent in the early evening and the last rays of sunlight touched the skyline, I would sit at my desk and think about that day in the conference room. The day I was supposed to fade into the background. The day I was meant to be invisible. Instead, I rewrote the ending. And I handed it directly to the people who mattered. Not with revenge, with clarity, with proof, with power.